Hello, I'm Bryan Wroten, senior reporter for CoStar News Hotels. I'm sitting here with John Schultzel. He is the Chief Growth Officer for Olympia Hospitality. John, thank you so much for joining us
Thanks
today.
for having me, Bryan.
So, uh, looking at where the industry is right now, there is a big opportunity for third-party hotel management. The space is really opening up as more owner operators are deciding, you know what, we like the owning part more than we like the operating part, and even the brands are like, you know what, we like the franchise model a lot more, where you can collect the fee and then let's leave the management to somebody else.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious about your thoughts on what has been going on in the third party space, just in terms of the amount of opportunities that are out there now, as well as what is going on with the amount of competition in this space.
I think it's a great question. It's been a pretty dynamic time, I think, for the third-party management space as a whole. We've been doing it for a long time, as a lot of our peers have. But in general, I think what you said initially is true. It's a complicated business. There's a lot of moving parts to it. Margins aren't always what they could be when you add layers of food and beverage and other sort of sophisticated operating models that layered into more complex properties. Like, it's not the right business for everyone. I think one of the things that's happened over the last half a dozen years or so, we'll say since COVID, is that the business has only gotten more difficult. There's been pressure on margins. And I think when that happens, people really decide we need to bring as much expertise to maintaining margins and values as possible. And third-party management companies who specialize in those elements of performance are the best resource for folks. We also do a lot of college and university work, specifically with schools that own their own hotels, and they're self-aware enough to know that it's just not what their skill set is, and they're better off bringing expertise versus trying to sort of grind it through on their own. And then I think you sort of get into in the third-party management space, like what's happening within that sphere specifically. And I think there's a couple things going on. One, I do think there's been more attention than ever brought to managing the fine details, because we've been under just a lot of wage pressure, energy pressure, insurance pressure. Revenue projections, like we were talking about earlier, have been, kind of flat or stalled out over the last couple of years. And I think everybody wants to preserve value, and you have to push on your operator to do that. In some cases, that means that groups like ourselves, which are definitely high touch and more specialized, we've seen a lot of people come to us because they want their management partner to be highly available and highly focused. And if you've got too many hotels under management, or you have a revolving door regional leadership, owners aren't going to feel the same way. On the flip side of the coin, because the management company business in and of itself is a labor-intensive process, you've got specialists in revenue management, sales, facilities, accounting, HR, et cetera, that there's been a lot of M&A activity as people have tried to find scale. And I think that's a delicate balance where growth is good. I'm a chief growth officer. I love growth.
You have to.
But at the same time, you don't want to outgrow your capacity to manage all those details that owners are looking to be managed.
So with that in mind, and knowing the types of properties that Olympia likes to manage, where do you see your opportunities then to grow?
I think part of our foundation is sort of evident in the campus hospitality space, and specifically, those are smaller, highly bespoke assets to the institutions that own them. And so we become a bit of a specialist, in smaller boutique properties that are somewhere in the 50 to 120 room range that just require a lot of touches. If it's food and beverage, if it's digital marketing and messaging, if it's the implementation of more complex distribution and revenue management strategies, because you're not relying on the franchise engine to deliver that contribution for you. That's where we've really carved out a niche for ourselves, partly because there's fewer players in that space who are really good at it. We've seen a lot of the larger groups create lifestyle divisions within their management companies, and I think that's because that's where traveler experiences are going and where new development wants to be executed. But I think for us, like we used to use this sort of silly pun about being a boutique management company. And what that means is we don't manage boutique hotels, but like how boutique hotels operate, we take a boutique approach to how we engage with the customer, in this case, the owner, which is we're highly customized. We adapt and evolve our reporting practices and our communication styles and our sort of cadence of meeting based on the individual owner's preferences. In some cases, that means the owner is more experience driven and less profit driven. And in some cases, it's the exact opposite. And so we have to pivot to the owner's priority as opposed to sort of pushing out our own sort of level of focus.
And we're seeing, a little bit of a spotlight on those types of properties in and around colleges and universities. I mean, we just, earlier this week, we had Hilton come out with the undergraduate brand, pairing with the graduate brand it acquired not too long ago. So I don't know what that means for Olympia, but certainly I think is a renewed, perhaps, interest in hotels in and around higher education.
I love the concept. I think, ultimately the graduate model is also sort of connected to D1 large land grant universities that have enough critical mass of demand to support private development. And so, and that was a very clever execution, extremely well done. And I think undergraduate is an extension of that. But those are franchise relationships. When you get sort of past that, I think there's another collection of markets where the school or the institution needs a lodging amenity for their community as the sort of the welcome mat for parents, or a communal place for campus and community to unite. But they just really don't have enough to support, traditional private development requirements and thresholds. And so we try to operate in that space as well, where we help the school achieve their goal of having premier lodging for their sort of collective of stakeholders or shareholders in a way that's economically sustainable for them, while at the same time letting the hotel be an expression of their brand as opposed to adapting the school's identity into kind of a fixed paradigm of branding, which is what Graduate does. They do a great job of it. All the graduates have whimsical design, and they have sort of a motif for that. And then they take the school's mascot and heritage and color palette and weave it into that. Whereas a lot of the work that we do, the school tells us really what it wants to express in the asset. And it's our job to bring that to life, either by naming, restaurant branding, interior design, or uniforms.
Right. So with that boutique approach in mind, when you look at the portfolio of properties that you manage, how does that work then, obviously, when you're working with independent properties versus branded?
That's a great question, actually. One of the things that we've tried to be really intentional about over the years, we started off, like many folks, really more on the franchise side. We tried to do highly distinctive select service franchises, for instance, that met the sort of the template of standards, but sort of elevated them with maybe enhanced design, something that would gain a rate premium or performance benefit in that marketplace. And so we developed a skill set around being really great franchise partners. And then we sort of migrated into the boutique independent space, which is a different skill set. And what we have found is that by investing time and energy in both of them, they're actually rather complementary. So by being great if you bring a boutique independent hotel to franchise operations, you can create a higher performing franchise hotel. And by using the platforms and the regimen and the great habits of franchise hospitality, you can provide, for instance, great structure and backbone to an independent hotel. And so we try to use the lessons from both to cross-pollinate performance at each. And that's been a good model for us.
So we were talking before we started recording just how things have been going in terms of general hotel performance, new forecast, and just other economic indications of where things are going. But despite, perhaps some warning indicators in the economic sense, people are still traveling. So I'm curious, just when you look at your own portfolio, what are you seeing in terms of guest behavior, demand trends and things of the like?
To be honest, we're a 50-year-old company.
Hmm.
Our headquarters are in New England, and so we've been through a few cycles before. And what we found in the last few is that even though there's a little economic stress, if it's geopolitical, if it's the price of gas, what have you, um, we have seen relatively, or at least lighter than expected, impacts of that angst in like real time traveler decisions. So as we sort of look into the coming few months, um, while it isn't our nature to be optimists in general, the data is really telling us that for all intents and purposes, we should anticipate really stable demand, good traveler patterns, especially on the leisure side. And so I think we're feeling pretty comfortable with where we're at, even though pace is a little bit off. We know booking windows are shorter. It's been that way for a while. But I think that, you know, while the data suggests, as you and I were talking about, that there should be maybe a little bit of anxiety out there in terms of what you're reading about in the daily news column, the data are really telling us something a little bit different than that, which is things are okay. People still want to go out. They book their vacation back in the spring, or they're just really not going to change their priorities. They might pivot a little bit based on weather forecasts or preferences, but I think people are really content to get in their car at $4.58 a gallon and go where they're going to go because the inventory is going to be available. We don't try to overreact by discounting based on pace, for instance. And as a result of that, I think we should all feel relatively comfortable that despite the fact that it's not necessarily the best headline that we're reading every day, that the demand is going to be there and that Americans want to be home for the summer.
Yeah, I think it was just yesterday on the brand CEO panel, Sebastian Bezan from Accor speaking about seeing as a result of the war going on in the Middle East that demand there had decreased, but the demand that was going to otherwise go there shifted to their branded properties in other markets. So he said, they're not canceling their plans; they're just
Rearranging them.
They're changing
Yeah,
the destination.
exactly. I think that's totally true. New England, using New England as an example, it's not exclusively what we do, but people either travel domestically or internationally, and international travelers either stay in Europe or, for instance, come to the U.S. But a lot of times, a negative reaction to one is replaced by a positive reaction in the other, and we sort of see that. I do think there was been a lot of, in the macro forecast frame, everybody was talking about the FIFA impact this year. It's not really a meaningful calculation for us because we're not in primary market destinations. But, I think in general, we do think about things like Canadian travel, which does impact us. And it was significantly off last year.
Oh, yeah.
So in totality, Canadian demand is still significantly off, but it's actually a little bit better than it was a year ago, which means it's an increase to demand net overall from a year ago. And we sort of do bake that into our thinking. So for instance, in our locations that are heavily reliant on Canadian travel are actually performing better this year than they were a year ago.
Oh, there you go.
There's a little bit of, both sides of the coin are relevant.
Right. So I guess with all that in mind, as you look to the back half of this year, what generally is your outlook then?
I think throughout our collection of hotels, and I think really with respect to everything you hear at NYU and how I was on a panel not long ago with another group of, I would say, complementary hoteliers, West Coast and more destination based. We were all kind of feeling the same thing, which is, it was kind of a rough start to the year for, reasons no one can control. But we have had a good second quarter. I think we're feeling optimistic about what happens going into the third quarter. September and October are really big months for our portfolio. And then we get into, October, November, December. And I think by then, we should have a head start on the year. And so we remain, cautiously optimistic on our future, despite the anxiety we were talking about earlier. So feeling pretty good about things.
Well, John, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. And thanks all of you for tuning in.
The marquee gathering of the industry's data community is almost here. Join us August 5th through 7th in Nashville for the 18th annual Hotel Data Conference. With a unique mix of attendees, impactful networking, and practical best practices you can put to work immediately, HDC is where data turns into decisions. Visit hoteldataconference.com to view the 2026 lineup and secure your spot today.
This episode of the CoStar News Hotels podcast was recorded on June 2nd, 2026, at the NYU International Hospitality Investment Forum by Meredith Sheridan and edited for podcast by Bryan Wroten. Head to costar.com/hotel news for more coverage from that event and more. You can find all our podcasts on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or your platform of choice. Thanks for listening.